Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Tuesdays with Mitch. I'm your host and fellow paralegal here, Emmeline. Every Tuesdays, we sit down with you live to answer your questions, concerns, or any questions that might be useful for you for your personal injury case. Or if anyone has a personal injury case that you know of, our information could definitely be useful. I also want to remind you guys that our show is now a podcast available on all major streaming platforms. So please don't forget to look us up on there, Proner and Proner, as all of our socials are. Today, as we get a little bit warmer weather, we have a great topic with the expert himself, Mitchell Proner, a personal injury attorney of over 30 years, who is also an avid motorcyclist. I don't know if a lot of people might know that, but he is. So, Mitchell, I want you to talk to us a little bit about biker season coming up and some fun information that the viewers might need to know or any events coming up.
All right. So first of all, May is Motorcycle Awareness Month, and it's a naturally every month is a good time to be aware of motorcyclists, but there are more of them on the road. In some cities and other countries, motorcycles are on the road all the time. And if somebody's driving a car and they're about to turn into a parking lot on their right or into a parking space on the right, before they make that turn to the right, they'll check their side view mirror. In America, drivers unfortunately don't do that. So if you're a rider, my best advice to you is to ride like you're invisible because you are. The cars aren't looking out for you as you're approaching an intersection and you see that car with the left turn blinker on and they're waiting and you're approaching and you think, okay, I've got the right of way. All right, they're waiting. No, they don't see you and they might just turn right into you. And unfortunately, that's the life of a motorcyclist. I am a motorcyclist. I get on my bike, I take the same risks you do. I've been hit by a vehicle that didn't observe my right of way. I broke my wrist, my ankle, and 7 bones in my back in a motorcycle accident over 20 years ago, over 30 years ago. And I've been riding ever since. And before that, I've been riding not most of my life, but certainly all of my adult life. Um, so, Motorcycle Awareness Month, ride like you're invisible because to the average motorist, you are. Uh, this weekend, there's a gathering of motorcyclists with the uh, Connecticut Confederation Motorcycle Clubs, but it's on Saturday, and Saturday might rain. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be on the bike or in my car. I used to ride uh, 12 months a year. The weather didn't matter. I rode my motorcycle in the snow. Now, as I'm a little more uh, seasoned, uh, I'll still ride in the rain, but typically I'll ride in the rain if I get caught in the rain or if I have to come back and I'm somewhere and and it's raining. I'll ride. I've got rain gear, but if I know it's going to rain all day and I have a choice, I might take my car. Uh, Next weekend on the 31st is the 5 borough motorcycle run, where there's a escort through all 5 boroughs. It's with the Abate of New York chapter, the 5 boroughs chapter, and you can look at Abate of New York and 5 boroughs and join up in the run. And it's got an escort and it's a lot of fun. And that's the following weekend. And of course, there's always events. There's if you check your motorcycle calendar, you'll find runs just about every weekend. But be careful out there. And if you have a motorcycle accident, you should probably get an experienced motorcycle accident attorney. I've represented motorcyclists in over 30 jurisdictions. I've tried more motorcycle accident case probably than any other attorney in the country. I've tried every type of case imaginable. I've handled every type of case imaginable, from motorcycle defect cases, motorcycle products liability cases, motorcycle versus car, motorcycle versus truck, motorcycle versus bus. And I actually know what juries think about these cases. And my office is the office that made the law in New York regarding motorcycle accident cases. If you look at appellate law in New York, I think we have more appellate decisions on our cases than any other office in the state. So we fight these cases thoroughly. Being part of the community, I enjoy the work and I enjoy helping the riders. And to consult with us is always free. So I'm here with my lovely and talented paralegal, Emmeline Sanchez. And Emmeline, what kind of questions have you got for me?
Okay, so let's jump right in. And again, always feel free to contact us 1-800-321-1234. We're always available. And what better attorney to represent you if you're in a motorcycle case than an avid motorcyclist himself, a part of the community? So let's jump right into the questions, Mitchell. What factors influence the value of a motorcycle accident case?
So, motorcycle accident cases, like just about every personal injury case, has three main factors. The first one is liability and damages. That's how good a case it is. If you don't have both liability and damages, it's really not that good a case. Liability is who's at fault, and damages is how badly was the person injured. Now, both of those topics can be broken down. So, first of all, liability. Liability oftentimes is determined by the actions of the rider and what caused the rider to have a collision. So, that was my fault. So, what caused the rider to have a collision? So, liability broken down, there is there is two parts. There's the culpable conduct or the fault of the defendant, and then there's the contributory negligence, if any, of the rider. So, for example, let's suppose it's your typical left turn case. Well, the vehicle that failed to observe the riders right away would be the left turning car. They would be at fault. But let's suppose there was a video showing the rider of the motorcycle was speeding, wasn't in control of his bike. Perhaps was passing traffic on the shoulder, riding where he shouldn't have been riding. That would be comparative negligence. And that can reduce the recovery. Same thing, let's suppose it's a municipality. There was a roadway defect, like construction debris in the roadway because they were doing construction, and the rider hits it. Well, maybe that construction company would be at fault. But at the same time, if the rider's speeding or not control of his motorcycle, if it had bald tires and no brakes, the rider might be contributory negligent, and that could reduce the recovery. Now, it could be an equipment violation or a license violation that doesn't have any bearing on fault. For example, let's suppose in my first scenario, left turn case, the car makes a left turn in front of the bike or into the bike, and the rider had no ability to avoid the accident. But it turned out the rider was not licensed and not insured. Well, he's still not at fault for the accident. and those issues probably wouldn't come into bear. Except the second issue is the ability of the defendant to pay. So fault can be broken down, but even if, and damages can be broken down. Damages would be, how bad are the injuries? Are there lost earnings? How much are the hospital bills? How much are the medical bills? Did it require medical follow-up? Did you require surgery? You could break down damages. Is the permanently impaired? Can they never return to their work? I broke my wrist, but as a lawyer, I was in court probably a week later. A construction worker might have lost earnings because they might not be able to go back to work as a construction worker. That would be an item of damages. For damages, you're entitled to past medical expenses, future medical expenses. For loss of earnings, you're entitled to past loss of earnings, future loss of earnings. And for pain and suffering, you're entitled to past pain and suffering, or pain and suffering to date, and future pain and suffering. You could break down damages, you could break down liability or who's at fault. But you need someone to pay. That's the second issue. How much insurance is there? Is the vehicle that turned left one with $5 million in coverage or $25,000 in coverage? If it has $25,000 in coverage, which is the minimum policy, and we do an asset check and there are no assets and the person pays their bills late, coverage might not be adequate to cover all the damages. But there's a second pocket that you could look at. Your own vehicle. Vehicles are entitled to purchase underinsured motorist coverage. So, for example, there might be another level of coverage. Your typical Uber might only have the driver covered for $100,000, but Uber itself might cover with underinsured motorists another $1.15 million. But if the Uber app's not on, you might be stuck to the 100. So there are different levels of insurance that may or may not cover the incident. That's the second issue. And the third issue is, unfortunate for the people that choose poorly, unfortunate for the ones that choose correctly. The third issue is, who's your lawyer? Now, when I first started practicing, I'd get motorcycle cases and I'd go to court or talk to insurance adjusters and I'd say, I think this case is worth a lot of money. And the adjusters would say, yeah, but you know what? Nobody likes motorcycles. Well, I started trying these cases and I found out that's not necessarily true. But a lot of attorneys might not want to try the motorcycle case because they're afraid nobody likes motorcycles, because they themselves don't ride. They themselves don't know how to explain riding to a jury. And so when the adjuster comes in with a low offer, they might say, yeah, that's fair for this case because nobody likes motorcycles. And for example, some people think motorcycles shouldn't be on the road because they're dangerous. And you're not going to convince people otherwise when you're picking a jury. If they've got their mind set, you don't want them on your jury. But I've said to the rest of the room, yeah, that's true. But then some people might think you shouldn't have Haagen-Dazs in the supermarket because it clogs arteries. And there's more people dying from heart disease than there is from motorcycles. But we allow people to eat Haagen-Dazs if they like it. And does anybody here think that we should put locks on the freezers just because it's dangerous?
No way.
So that's those are the three factors that I think come into play: how good the case is, where the coverage is, and who the lawyer is.
There does seem to be a negative stigma around motorcyclists. So as Mitchell said, choose correctly. Hopefully you guys out there aren't one of the people who don't choose correctly and end up with an attorney that doesn't really understand. Now, how can a motorcycle accident lawyer help secure better compensation for
Okay, how can you get better compensation for your client? So, first of all, you got to do your homework. Immediately, you have to try and get whatever coverage there might be available. You have to also do your investigation. Nowadays, there's much more surveillance video on buildings and cars than there and trucks than there were in the past. So we had a case with a truck the other day. I immediately sent out what's called a spoliation letter. A spoliation letter is a letter advising the owner of the trucking company, you better save your videos because I know you have them. And if you don't save them, we could have that held against you in a court of law. It puts them on notice that there are penalties for destroying evidence because a lot of times these videos get recorded over in 72 hours. And that's for buildings, gas stations, and also these trucks. So you got to act and act quickly. The rider has to get in touch with a good lawyer right away. Otherwise, you might lose that powerful evidence. The last thing is you got to get records for your uh, injuries, which only happens if you get medical treatment. Now, I had a woman come into my office today. It wasn't a motorcycle accident case, it was a fall. And she had a bad injury with surgery on her hip. And she was telling me her story about the pain she was in and walk with a cane. And I said to her, you know, you could talk to me and I could talk to you and say, oh, that's terrible. I'm so sad for you for the next 4 years. That's not what I do. I try to get you money. That's what I do. And the way I could get you money is with proof. And you're telling me doesn't provide any proof in any admissible form. If you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor what's bothering you, the doctor might give you medicine. He might give you physical therapy. He might recommend more testing. He might be in a position, number one, to make you feel better, which is really what you want, which is more important than any money I could get you. And number two, those records that he generates, because every doctor is required by law to keep records. And additionally, they want to keep records because every doctor is a doctor typically for pay. You've heard the expression doctor bills. Well, doctor bills exist because doctors want to get paid. And doctors can't get paid without keeping records. They have a legal requirement to keep records. And they have a financial interest in keeping records because that's how they get paid. But those records serve the motorcycle accident victim. If the motorcycle accident victim goes to the doctor, number one, the patient might feel better. And number two, as an attorney, I can use those records to get you the money you deserve. Without records, you're not going to get paid. Now, a lot of people might think, yeah, but if I go to the doctors, those are bills I got to pay. But you can get compensation because those bills, and they show pain and suffering. The bills you might have to pay back, but the pain and suffering that money you put in your pocket. And without the bills and the records, you don't have any money for your pain and suffering because a lawyer can't call up the insurance carrier and say, my client got so badly injured. And the carrier says, send me the records, send me the bills. And you say, oh, I don't have them, but the client came to my office and told me. The insurance company's going to laugh. They're going to say, it doesn't work like that. So get the right lawyer, have a lawyer that wants to do his work, and get the treatment you need. And those are the things that increase the value of a claim.
Okay, so how about what's one of your favorite motorcycle accidents that you've handled, or one of your most recent ones?
So I don't want to say my favorite.
He doesn't have favorites.
No, I don't want. It's not that because it's not like, oh, I'm so happy. I had no. I can say is I've got war stories that you wouldn't believe. So I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Uh, I'll tell you my son's uh, favorite story. Uh, he called it the decline from hell. But for me, it was just a case that it was pretty good work. So what happened was this client, um, he was he had an unusual background, and unfortunately for him in New York, a criminal background, while it might not have anything to do with how the accident happened or the injury sustained, most judges will allow that in court, and the law supports them. So I had a client who, when he was 19 years old, he shot 4 people in a nightclub, and he went to jail for about 10 years. And he got out of jail and he got a job in the mortgage business. He said because in those days, they didn't care about crimes. They just cared about crimes of dishonesty, and shooting people apparently wasn't dishonest. So he got his mortgage brokerage license. He did that for a while, and then he stopped doing that, and he got a job working on high rises as a construction worker. And he said he took to it like a duck to water. And he worked in construction, and he bought a motorcycle. And he was passing a Comcast truck. As the truck was turning, and he had an accident and hit a tree. Now, the police report said that there was no contact between the truck and the motorcycle. And it said that the motorcycle passed the truck as it was making a left turn by the motorcycle going over a double yellow line. And then he swerved to avoid the truck, lost control of his motorcycle, and hit a tree. Now, the guy had a bad broken leg. I took the case to try and help him out. And the motorcyclist said the truck hit me. Well, the Comcast vehicle, they hired an accident reconstructionist. And the engineer, accident reconstructionist, said accident could not have happened the way the motorcyclist said it did. The motorcycle said that the truck had moved over to the right, looked like it was parking, looking for a map or something, and then just turned into his path, hitting him. And as a result, his direction changed, and that's why he hit the tree. And the engineer said, based on where the truck would have had to have been to make that turn, and the tree was, it couldn't have happened like that. So I tried to get my own accident reconstructionist, and the engineer I got said, nah, your client's story doesn't make sense by the physics. So I looked for another one, still didn't make sense based on the physics. So I said, okay, can't get an engineer, but I still have my client's story, and that's proof. So, case about to go to trial. And my client, unfortunately, was allegedly pistol whipping somebody and pled guilty to possession of a weapon that he wasn't supposed to have as a convicted felon, and he goes back in jail. And gets out of jail a couple of years later. And so now the case is ready to be tried a couple of years later. But now we got two things. We got him. He's a shot four people, and he also pistol whipped somebody in possession of a weapon. Then there was another one in there. He's out of jail for only a month, and apparently they said he kidnapped his girlfriend and locked her in his trunk and threatened to kill her. Now, I'm not doing any of the criminal case. And his defense was it was a hatchback. He didn't put her in the trunk. And he said the girl is still his girlfriend. But he goes into jail for that one too. And now the case goes to trial. And I'm trying it against the truck driver. And Comcast is the owner of the vehicle. And I got my client. They put on the engineer. And I cross-examine the engineer. Now, when they put on during a trial, a lot of things happen. So the defendant made an objection. I said, no, it's admissible. So the judge calls a sidebar. They tell the jury to go in the back. And then they tell my client and the truck driver to go out of the courtroom while we argue the law. We argue the law. The judge tells us to come back in. We're about to bring the jury back in. All of a sudden, the other lawyer says, I got to speak to you, Your Honor. We go up to the bench, and the judge says, the defense attorney says to the judge, and the judge says to me, defense counsel here says, he says your client threatened to kill him while they're in the hallway. Anyway, I said to my client, what happened? He says, no, I didn't threaten to kill him. I just said in my neighborhood, people think I said, you can't say that. Anyway, when it came to the accident reconstructions, I said to him, you say there was no contact. He said, yes, there was no contact. This is the engineer. I said, do you know how high the handlebars of the motorcycle? And he says, I don't know. Handlebars are usually between 42 and 56 inches. I said, well, you knew the model of the motorcycle, right? Do you know whether it was stock or was modified? He says, no. I said, do you know if the handlebars were drag bars that go straight across, or ape hangers that go up, or stock, or Elkhorn, or what model of hand? No, I don't know. Well, you saw photos, you could have figured it out. Yeah. You could have asked to examine the vehicle. Yeah. If you don't know how high the handlebars are, no. Do you know how high the running boards of the trailer were? No. I said, so now you see there was no contact, but you don't know, you didn't do any matchups against the two vehicles. You don't know where they would have hit. You didn't know where to inspect for. So so anyway, jury comes back, finds 100% in favor of my client. And I didn't represent him on the criminal case, but the judge let his entire background in. The judge let everything about his criminal background in, let the jury heard all. I objected, and I won the case. And I tried the case on the facts that I had. I just represented him on the accident case and on his injuries. And we got him a substantial recovery. And there was no pay going in. But the idea that people just don't like motorcyclists, with the right attorney, that's not necessarily true. So I don't know if that's my favorite case, but my son, I'd come back from work every day and say, what case you work on now? I told him that one. He was like, whoa.
I can see how he got his nickname, though. I definitely see where he got it from.
And
Okay,
glad.
we do have a question for the audience. I do want to remind everybody that you can always send us questions if you're watching live. If you have any questions, if anything pops up, feel free to send in any question live. So thank you, Foster Studio. His question is, what is the difference between a car case and a motorcycle case in terms of compensation?
Well, on some cases, a motorcycle uh, rider is entitled to more compensation than a car accident victim because the laws are different. New York has a no fault law where there's a serious injury threshold. So on a motorcycle accident, you might just have some road rash and be entitled to compensation, whereas that might not meet the threshold in a car, and you might not get any compensation with the same injury. So sometimes a motorcyclist is entitled to more money. Um, Other than that, damages, you got to look them as they are, and what you could sustain on appeal, what you get a jury to give you. I don't think it should be less for a motorcycle accident case, and sometimes they're more. But other attorneys think otherwise because, as I mentioned, they say, "Oh, nobody likes motorcycles," and that's nonsense. The right attorney will get you fair compensation.
Okay, and another one we have Luis Carlos Perez. Do motorcycle insurance policies work the same way for the driver as they do the passenger? Thank you for your question, Luis.
Yes, yes, they do. Except the driver, and typically with motorcycles, we say the rider, not the driver. Uh, so the rider might be held at fault because they might not have braked properly. The best way to brake a motorcycle is by using both your brakes. Some people come into my office, they say, "I was taught only to use the rear brake." No, you were taught wrong. That's not the best way to stop a motorcycle. The best way is and some motorcycles have computer controlled interlocked anti-skid brakes where a computer system will actually calculate how much braking there should be between the two wheels, and you might only hit the front brake or the rear brake, and the bike will automatically calculate the proper braking for optimum minimized stopping distance. But the rider maybe should have swerved, didn't swerve, whatever it was. The passenger can never be held at fault. So the passenger might have a right to a greater compensation because there can't be any comparative negligence for the passenger. But the insurance typically works the same.
Okay, great. I do want to remind everybody to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is where you can find all of our videos if you missed them, or if you listen to our podcast and you want to watch the actual video later on. Proner and Proner, all of our socials, follow us so you never miss a beat or an informational video. You never know what the topic is, they're always interesting. Again, always free consultations, confidential and free consultations at 1-800-321-1234. Do you have any other words for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, ride carefully. Ride carefully, and if for any reason a driver doesn't obey the rules of the road and causes you injury, call us right away. We'll do everything we can for you. Consultation is always free and confidential. And be careful this riding season, and hopefully you'll keep the shiny side up and the rubbers on the tires on the ground, and you have a safe riding season, and we'll always be here for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to our testimonial video. We'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Emily.
Yes.
My name is Zach Gordon. I was on my motorcycle on my way home from work on the LIE when someone in a van swerved over the double solid line of the HOV lane and hit me, and I took a pretty gnarly tumble. I ended up fracturing a bone in my wrist. I had a concussion as well as nerve damage in my right arm, but the worst injury was probably the ruptured disc I had in my neck. which ended up requiring spine surgery. I had the disc replaced and whatnot. In that meantime, I posted about the accident, letting, some friends I had on Reddit know about what happened and whatnot. And a random person reached out to me and said, I had an accident as well. And, Proner and Proner really helped me out for much more minor injuries than you. So I think you'd have a good case with them. And next thing I know, I reached out to Proner and Proner and was almost immediately put in touch with Mitchell the same day. From that point forward, it was super simple. I signed the retainer, gave any medical professionals I saw my attorney's information, and I had to speak to my attorney maybe if even once a month, once every 2 months. And next thing I know, in quite literally less than a year, the case was already over with a very, very good settlement. Essentially set me up for the future, and I'm very, very grateful to Mitchell Proner and the rest of his, I suppose, employees at Proner and Proner. And I would absolutely recommend this firm to anyone that has been in a similar situation or scenario as me, or if anyone you may know, this could not have been an easier and more desirable outcome and process.